Hello, YouTube. My name is Alan, and it's that time once again. Let's talk metal. Tonight, we're going to do another heavy metal book review. I read a lot over the 2023-2024 holiday season, so yeah, kind of working through these over time. The book we'll be discussing tonight is this one. It's titled Death, the Antidote to Misery, and it is by Mats Eriksson. This is an interesting one. It's published on PMET Publishing House, and yeah, it comes with some gorgeous cover art by Par Olofsson. So this, if I remember correctly, is Matt's second book. His background's kind of interesting. He is a paleontologist at a Swedish university, Lund University, and yeah, this is his second book on heavy metal. It's the first one I've read. I don't have the other one. This was sent to me as a gift by a heavy metal collecting buddy over in Sweden. So thank you very much. Really appreciate you getting a copy of this for me. I had not seen it or heard anything about it. There was some press around it at the time of release. It's a kind of a wacky concept for a book. And it's going to take a minute to explain. There's no simple way to do this. The background is that in paleontology, when you discover a new fossil species, you get to name it. Whoever discovers it and realizes that, yes, this is the first time a fossil of this species has been found, that's the person who gets to name it. And in a lot of cases, people name them in different manners for different reasons. But a lot of times they will name the species after, somebody they admire. And there have been a lot of cases over the years where people have named a fossil species after a famous musician. So the idea for Matt's book here is that, he writes from the perspective of a, fictional narrator. I'm supposing it's himself, who is a paleontologist who's going to go around and interview all of these different famous musicians, a lot of them heavy metal people, but a lot of them also not. But yes, he sets out to interview all these people specifically to find out what they kind of, think about having a fossil named after them. It's kind of like, so what is your reaction to somebody naming a 480 million year old Ordovician snail after you? And as these, interviews are set up and occur, each time it goes horribly, horribly wrong, and something very supernatural and horrific occurs, in the best death metal kind of tradition. Yeah, the title I should also point out, there is a play on this, Death, the Antidote to Misery could obviously, at first be read as just like, oh, life is miserable and, death is the cure to that. But Matt's actually explains in the introduction that it's more like, well, it's more like, when I'm feeling miserable, I play some death metal and it makes me feel better about things. So a very clever play there in the book title. Big thumbs up for that. And it's very clear, throughout the book that, yeah, Matt's, is a huge music fan, knows, a lot of, heavy metal, death metal in particular. And yeah, is really into a lot of this stuff. And he has, throughout the book here and there, there are some footnotes, and notes in the back of the book explaining a few things here and there. Because the idea is that, yeah, there's a lot of, little, odd paleontological references spliced in, along with references to lots of, bands and musicians and albums. So it's this, very weird combination of paleontology and metal meet each other on the battleground of like a horror gore splatter flick. Like I said, it takes a little explaining. So it's an interesting concept. Each chapter then is devoted to one of these fictional interviews where he explains that he's off to meet this particular musician to talk about the fact that they've had some type of trilobite or whatnot named after them. Yeah, and again, the interview always goes completely off the rails as, for example, Madonna's head falls off and arachnid legs pop out of the sides of it, and the head keeps talking to him as it scuttles around while her headless body is sitting there in a chair. Things like that happen. So it's very much meant to be sort of a crazy, goofy, spoofy, fun, over the top kind of just weird shit going on kind of thing. Um, and the tales, they do that very much. I do have to say now, here's where I do have some issues getting through this book. The first thing you have to be prepared for is, there are a lot of, sort of puns and stuff that are really low hanging fruit, like dad joke level stuff. And, you know, let's face it, this is me. If you've watched much of my content, I'm not above using dad jokes. The trick with such humor, in my experience, is that you gotta space it out a little bit. It works, it's effective when you use a little here and a little here and a little here. When you start using a lot of it more rapid fire, it wears out its welcome even faster than when you only use a little of it here and there. Yeah, and I do think, there are times that, Matt's was maybe trying to force too many puns into too small of a space in some of the chapters. Some parts of the stories get very contorted just so he can cram another album title reference, yeah, into the dialogue. One example of this, yeah, at one point when the narrator is scheduling an interview, he makes the phone call to the management, and the manager turns out to be David Mustaine. So he's having this conversation with Dave Mustaine to set up an interview with this other famous musician. And as the phone call is wrapping up, the narrator says, "Okay, great, thanks so much. I'm looking forward to it. Peace out." And then Mustaine replies on the other end of the line, "Yeah, peace sells, but who's buying?" It's kind of like, this doesn't make any sense in the course of the conversation. It doesn't even make any like, oh ha ha, goofy sense. There's no reason for the narrator to say peace out. He's not, coming across as a hippie type. He's not talking to somebody who's like into, peace, love, and sunshine. Um, and the narrator even says like peace out, and then there's always like, huh, it was a strange thing for me to say. It's like, yes, it was. So why did you say it? And then you get, well, you said it to set up, for Mustaine to say peace sells, but who's buying? But bum. But why would Mustaine reply in that way? The comment makes no sense. So the joke just feels horribly forced in. And I feel like, there are a fair number of times that kind of exchange happens where it's just like, you just trying a little too hard to get, those extra things worked in where they just don't really fit. So the joke ends up falling flat. So yes, you have to be ready for, a lot of that kind of level of humor. It can be funny at times, but I think there's a lot of swings and misses. It's just as many, swings and hits here. Um, Second problem is that there's an issue with suspension of disbelief. Now, again, obviously, this is all fiction. It's meant to be sort of like I said, the crazy, over the top, almost dead alive type, ridiculousness. The problem, though, with wanting this to sort of be couched in really horrific events, is that none of the characters respond in a manner that makes it seem horrific. Uh, For example, with the example I gave before on Madonna's head falling off and the giant crab legs popping out of it and the head starting to scuttle around. Yeah, this is one of those moments where obviously the narrator should run screaming in terror or pass out with fright or, this is, the kind of stuff that, puts you in a padded cell for years. Yet the narrator's response is usually be like, describe what's happening, be like, oh, this is so crazy, but then just to kind of roll with the punches, Madonna's, head is starting to scramble around there and looks up at him. He's like, all right, starts jabbering. I'm just like, and he just kind of, well, oh, wow, that was weird. Sorry, your head fell off. Does it do that much? And she's like, well, only under this one very weird circumstance, which, you said the secret word by accident, and yeah, my head fell off. Sucks. And then they kind of carry on their conversation as if nothing had happened. And so it's like, well, it's described as being horrific and, obviously sets, a mental image of something, yes, gruesome and terrible, but nobody acts like it's that gruesome or terrible, really. They just kind of carry on with things. So, as such, nothing ever comes across here as particularly gruesome or scary or terrifying because nobody responds in that way. It'd be a little bit like, reading a Lovecraft story where, you have all the buildup and, then the investigator, peeks, into the cellar and sees, the spawn of Yog-Sothoth, writhing about, and describes, the horrible twisting of tentacles from colors out of space, and then says, oh, wow, that's a really weird thing to find in a basement. I wonder where that came from. Uh, Weird. There's just, okay, you set it up, for it to be one thing, and it just isn't that thing. So yeah, that kind of, the lack of horror delivery is a little weird just because they, set it all up to be horror and it never isn't. Hmm. Third thing that I think you have to be, a bit mindful of is there are some, again, plot points that just not only the reader's sense of suspension of disbelief doesn't work, but the narrator's suspension of disbelief doesn't seem to work either. A great example of this is the chapter where he's, interviewing Jimi Hendrix. Start of the chapter, he goes to talk to Jimi Hendrix, tries to have an interview with him. It goes horribly wrong, so he heads home and there's sections later, there's like, oh, and then you're like, I kind of sat bolt right up in bed and suddenly realized, holy shit, wait a minute. Didn't Jimi Hendrix die 50 years ago? It's like, you're going to bring that up now? Because, yeah, that's not something you can just randomly forget for a plot point. It's like the person's a Jimi Hendrix fan, and everyone in the world, that's ever heard of Jimi Hendrix knows he's dead and he's been dead for decades. Yet the way this plays out, we're supposed to believe that you were contacted by Hendrix's estate to arrange an interview with Hendrix, and that you went there and talked to Jimmy and left and flew home. And then several hours later, you finally was like, oh, silly brain. Hendrix is dead. I, the story doesn't really work in that regard. I mean, again, I know they're going for something that's, yeah, just meant to be this kind of, crazy loopy stuff. But at that point, that story just doesn't work for anymore. It's like, no, no, you can't quite put it together that way because you can't forget that Jimi Hendrix is dead. You just can't. That can't be. That doesn't work as a joke even for me because it's no. There's no way this person can possibly not know Jimmy was supposed to be dead the whole time. They take another stab at it in the Michael Jackson chapter and handle it a little bit better because the interview is set up in the early 80s when Jackson was still alive. And at the end of the chapter, he gets to interview Jackson a second time. Once again, the first interview goes all to shit. So he doesn't get it finished. And years later, Michael Jackson contacts him to finish the interview. But it's after Michael Jackson's dead. But in that chapter, it makes sense like, yeah, didn't she like die years ago? And Jackson explains, oh, well, I faked my death to get out of the public spotlight. So it's like, okay, the way that one's structured, yes, you can you can play along with that one. That works fine. But yeah, the Hendrix chapter, I'm sorry, I can't play along with a narrator who's a huge Hendrix fan and apparently forgot for several days worth of international travel that the person he was going to go talk to was dead. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of things like that, that make some of these, short stories not really work, I think the way they're intended to. It is still a fun read. The parts I think, that are really the most fun from my perspective, because, and this may only be because I have a background in paleontology, is when they splice in some of those details, like having Tony Iommi kind of geek out about the fact that you can date conodonts based on this weird color index that shows how long they've been buried. Yeah, and that there's a footnote that Matz includes that explains that to readers. And it's just like, that's cool that he worked that in there. Um, so yeah, those parts, work fine. It's just, some of these other, parts where, again, let's face it, it's, while it sounds like, kind of, this fun, goofy concept, it's not an easy, mixture of elements that he's chosen to try to combine. You're trying to take, this weird, scientific, trivia, combine it, with, rock and roll celebrities who obviously 99.9% of them have no interaction there whatsoever. And then again, you're trying to channel it all into like, these sort of like, creep show type, Tales from the Crypt short story format where shit's supposed to go bad. But at the same time, the way you set it up, nobody really acts like it's that bad in at least in a lot of the stories. So, it's a mixed bag. Uh, some books you sit down, they're page turners, you burn through them, or you finish reading it, and afterwards you want to go back and go through it again. This book is not that for me. This is the kind of book where you pick it up, you read one short story. You're just like, you know what? I'm going to read the tale here where he goes and visits, the guys from Rotting Christ, and things all go pear-shaped. But then that's it. I'm reading that one, then I'm putting it down. A few days later, pick it up and be like, "Yeah, okay, let's see what happens when he meets Simon and Garfunkel. That might be weird and interesting." Like I said, some of the stories are going to work better than others, but it's, for me, it's not something I can sit down and just read story after story after story after story from. The constant inundation with, the really tortured puns wears on me over the course of several stories. And sometimes you just hit that one story where you're just like, no, 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 mm-mm. Sorry, but gotta throw yellow card or red card. I don't want to say red card. I think that's the one where you get kicked out for. And Matt should not be kicked out for any of these. He's having a fun time with it. There's lots of, nice illustrations and all that. But I'm at least going to throw the yellow card. Be like, watch it there. That's that one that one needed a little more work, perhaps. So yeah, that's my take on Death, the Antidote to Misery. And I'm sorry if it sounds like I'm crapping on the book a little bit. It's a fun concept. It really is. I'm glad I got a copy of it and got to check it out. But if I'm being honest, no, it's not my favorite read that I've come across in recent times. It's a really cool concept, and it's a neat idea to meld these very different things together. I like the idea. Um, yeah, I feel like maybe just some of the way it was delivered at times could be a little stronger. And in closing, just to be very clear, um, it's not a language barrier thing or anything like that. Matz's English throughout the book is impeccable. I've interacted with several record collectors and music fans from Sweden over the years and years. They all have like the best English imaginable. They speak, write, and read it better than Americans do. So I just want to make it clear that I'm not picking on the guy because there was a perceived, issue with him translating things or, having trouble with the linguistics or the grammar. Not whatsoever. There's no issues with that whatsoever. But yeah, so if you're in the mood for like some very weird tales that mesh science, paleontology in particular, into some famous rock and roll and metal superstars, and you think you can handle the dad jokes and such, go ahead and give it a try. It's a kind of cool book. It's going to look great on the bookshelf, if nothing else, even if it's not one that, I'm going to pull off and read for hours on end. And that is going to do it for this heavy metal book review. So now let's talk metal in the comments down below. Have you read this book? If so, what did you think of it? What do you think of the concept of, paleontologist interviews rock stars and shit goes sideways in a very horrific manner? Sound intriguing? Does it sound just too far out of your wheelhouse? If you've read Matt's other book, what's that one like? Let folks know so that maybe they want to keep an eye out for that one and check it out if they come across it at some point. All right, so let's call it right there. Until next time, everybody take care. And as always, keep banging your head, even if it falls off in the middle of a conversation and grows giant arachnid legs and crawls around the floor.